She was auctioned minutes after childbirth, and the winning bid was her freedom. Noon burned flat over Dry Creek Crossing, the square crowded tight around the feed store steps where a plank table sat with a ledger and a tin bell. A sign written in a hard hand said, "County Seizure Sale," and the bailiff read out lots like he was weighing nails, a pallet, a cot, a cradle, and last a woman put up for bonded labor to settle the road levy. They had dragged her from the livery after the midwife cut the cord, a grey blanket tight around her shoulders, a newborn pressed to her chest and still learning the breath of this place. The mayor's clerk lifted the blanket corner and laughed soft. The crowd breathed in and did not like what was in their mouths. The clerk's name was Laish Porter, and Laish wore a seal on a ribbon that made him feel taller. He said the levy stood at $27.50 plus fee. He said the county had a duty to balance accounts in daylight. He said the woman would wear the county's chain until the sum was met in rope days and wash days. The mayor, Silas Bren, nodded without looking at the woman. Bren wore a broad hat and a broad grin, and a reputation for counting what was not his. He said, "Who will start?" and he said it like a sermon. A murmur rolled and folded. A ranch hand spit and looked away. A boy at the edge put 2 fingers in his mouth and took them out again without whistling. The sky made a sound like iron when wind runs a wire. The woman said her name once under the blanket, Faith Marlowe. Her voice a dry creak. The midwife Hannah stood on the step below with blood on her sleeves and fire in her eyes and said, "This is not law, this is hunger with a ribbon." Laish touched the ribbon like it answered him and said, "The paper is clear. The county needs coin, and coin is coin, whether it is carried by a mule or a girl." A low laugh came from Bren then. He said a woman is cheaper the hour she becomes a mother and cheaper still if she argues. The crowd took a step back from their own ears. The baby made a small sound like a soft tack on a board. A rider eased his bay through the alley behind the smithy and came up on the square side on. He slid down slow like a man who had done too many miles quick. His coat was trail thin, his jaw rough, his eyes the color of creek shade. Some men knew that face from posters that had blown off fences 2 winters ago. Asher Keene, a scout who left a company camp the night the tents went red, a man whose name was a question in 3 towns and an answer in none. He took in the blanket, the baby, the bell, the seal, the clerk, the mayor, and something in his back straightened like a rope pulled clean. The midwife saw him see and did not look away. Asher stepped to the table and put down what he had. He said, "I bid $30 cash, my saddle worth 20 and my bay until the end of lambing. Stake is written plain, freedom not service. Faith Marlowe walks out, and the child is hers and no man calls her property." His voice carried to the back rail. The square went still as if a cloud had crossed. Laish blinked and laughed without sound. "Terms like that are not on the page," he said. The mayor tipped his hat so folks could see his ring. "We do not sell a woman to herself," he said. "We sell her to work what she owes." Asher nodded once, then louder. $40 and my bay to the county remount. Stake is the woman walks. If the county refuses the stake I name, I call this sale a theft under a forged seal in front of witnesses, and I reckon the ranger riding out of Dry Mesa will be glad to hear the name said out loud. A small tremor moved along the edge where boys stood on barrels. The crowd opened like water when a wagon wheel hits it. Down the lane came Marshal Cutler Snipe, with a white scarf at his throat and a scar on his jaw like a bad line of ink. Snipe was a name that made men keep their hands visible. He had lost 2 fingers in a fight with a silver camp and found a badge better than knuckles. He walked with his hand near his belt, his coat neat in a way that said someone else brushed it. He said, "This sale is lawful and final." He said, "Bids are coin only." He said, "Any man louding a ranger into county business can come spend a night counting mice in our cells." His eyes clipped to Asher, and he smiled like a trap resets. He said, "Keen, I hoped you had frozen 2 winters back. You have a talent for finding fires." First shot came from a nervous deputy in a window, a pop. A plank on the feed store stair burst splinters and dust like a kicked nest. Women jerked children down without thinking. Asher's Colt cleared leather. He turned his wrist and sent a round into the bellpost. Iron rang like a church that had forgotten its own hymn. The marshal drew. Asher stepped with the blow of the bell still singing. His second shot took the ribbon clean off Laish's neck and pinned the blue cloth to the ledger, with the same nail that held the price list. The sound of that nail-biting wood was louder than any pistol. Men in the back stopped moving and suddenly found themselves made of eyes. No blood, no bodies, just dust and iron and a seal stuck to a board by a common nail. Marshal Snipe held his gun halfway and then eased it down like a man lowering a hammer near glass. Laish's hand came up to his bare throat and found no ribbon there. The baby cried. Faith shifted the child higher, with the careful slowness of a woman who would not drop what was never given to her. The midwife's voice cut the square. Enough, she said. You are not selling breath while it is still counting itself. Bren puffed his chest, and the wind made a fool of his hat brim. Asher's gun muzzle stayed low, dust ring glowing at the front sight. His left hand open, his right steady. The next minutes hid in the back room of the church. Boards cool underfoot and a cracked pane humming with wind. Asher slid the bolt. Midwife Hannah pushed Faith onto a bench and set the baby to quiet with 2 fingers and a worn scrap of cotton. The woman shook once and then held still. She looked at Asher like she was measuring a fence post for rot. He said I was the man who carried a dispatch for Bren 2 years back, a false levy for hay that never arrived. It let him put his hand in half the valley. I rode it to the telegraph and told myself I was just a horse with legs. The midwife blew a breath through her teeth that sounded like a saw. Faith's voice was paper-thin but straight. If you are telling truth to ease your stomach, keep it, she said. If you are telling truth to stop a bad thing, speak faster because they will push that door any second. The baby gripped the edge of the blanket with a fist the size of a walnut and made a sound that reset every clock in the room. Asher unrolled a strip of leather and took out a small iron key. This came from a clerk who died 2 towns east, he said. He pressed my hand and said, this opens a chest under the vestry boards. The clerk had a ledger with Laish's name and Bren's seal numbers, and the road fee printed twice for the same 10 miles. I have looked at that chest 3 nights. I have not turned the key, because a door sometimes makes more wind than a man can carry. Hannah knelt and lifted the loose plank, like she had known it would be that one. There was the chest, short and black and mean. The key turned with a hard click that made Faith's eyes close and open slow. Inside, folded, a list of duplicate payments, a letter from a quartermaster who had tried to quit and then did not write again, a receipt for a donation to a mayoral campaign box, in a hand that matched the sign on the table outside. The midwife read fast, then looked up with a face that had learned a new word and did not like it. Leverage, she said, and proof. Hooves pounded the lane, not the county boys heavier. 6 riders under a black slicker captain with a brass tube case, company bounty men. The second pole that makes a first one stand taller than it should. The captain's name was Noah Prentice, and Prentice had a contract with the railroad to make disputes. Forget themselves, he carried a paper that could make a sheriff step aside, and a short shotgun whose mouth never blinked. Prentice called through the church door like a man offering grace. Hand the woman out and the paper in the chest, and I will let the square keep the rest of its day, he said. His men laughed once and swallowed it. Marshal Snipe stood with Bren on the steps. 2 sharks when a bigger one shows its fin, stakes doubled and then doubled again in one breath. Faith lifted her head and the room changed shape. She said I was the courier they never guessed. I took the clerk's ledger under my dress the day his heart failed at the counter. I married Tom Marlowe, the farrier, because the town needed a story to hide the truth. Tom took a bullet in a stable fire this spring, and Bren said a levy was due for the water. The bucket brigade spilled. I went into labor the hour I ran. The livery girl Hannah dragged me to her bench, and then men with paper hands came and counted me in loose change. She pulled a square of muslin from the blanket edge with her teeth and showed the stitched numbers, the same seal code from the letter, sewn in dull thread so it could not be scraped out by fear. Asher looked at the numbers and then at Faith, and felt the ground under all his mistakes tilt. The goal was not just freedom, it was daylight on a ledger. Asher opened the door before fear could teach his fingers to shake. He walked out with both hands up, Colt butt forward. He said to Prentice, I learned to count today. I have something that costs you more to shoot than to hold. He turned the Colt so the sun flashed on the cylinder. He looked down at the hammer like a man deciding to give away a tooth. He offered the gun to Prentice grip first. The bounty captain smiled with his mouth and his eyes both. Finally, he said, a smart one. His men let out their breath. Marshal Snipe shifted to get a better look. Laish smoothed his hair like a hen. In the door's shadow, the midwife pulled the bell rope through the wall with both hands. A heavy oak clapper up in the belfry hung on a knot she had tied as a girl, a knot she had always promised to unknot when the day came. Her fingers worked and the knot came. The clapper dropped and struck. The bell screamed. Men on horses flinched. Prentice's hand twitched. Asher's left hand moved like a carpenter pulling a nail. He snatched the Colt back out of Prentice's loose fingers before weight and sound remembered what they were. He stepped sideways and fired into the board above Bren's head, the nail that held the seal ribbon buried deeper, pinning the paper hard. The crowd roared without a word being said. No man fell, no blood on dust, only hats jerked, pride dented, and 3 guns pointed at ground that had done nothing wrong. The bell kept swinging like a heartbeat. The town could hear for the first time in months. A ranger shoulder patch showed at the far edge. Then a tall woman with a coat that had ridden 5 counties and a face that looked like it had told men no more often than yes. Ranger Eldon Quinn, older, quiet, with a book of warrants and a memory for numbers. She did not shout. She walked through the people who made a lane without thinking. She took the letter from the midwife's hand and held it up, where the light could take it too. She read the code. She touched the ring on Bren's finger. She asked Prentice to fold his shotgun, and he did, because sometimes men do what they are told by eyes that have seen worse. The ranger spoke to the square like she was telling the weather. Duplicate vouchers for the same 10 miles of road, a quartermaster's complaint, a donation to a mayor's chest that never made it to any church, a clerk named Laish Porter who signed both sides of the same coin, a marshal who blessed seizures under a broken seal number that matches this ring, she said. Marshal Snipe tried to move air with his hands and found it heavy. He put his gun down on the plank table and stepped back 1 step like the earth had pushed. Bren said, "This is a mistake in ink. We can clear it up in my office." The ranger shook her head like a tree sheds snow. "This is a mistake in daylight," she said, "and daylight fixes ink." Prentice calculated losses the way a banker does when a vault door sticks. His men looked at the crowd, and then at their captain, and then at their own hands. The ranger told Laish to take off the ring, and Laish could not get it past the knuckle fast enough. She put the ring in a pouch and wrote the seal number on her palm with a stub of pencil. Then she turned to Faith and Asher in the doorway and said, "The county's claim is voided in public right now." She asked the midwife for the child's name, and the midwife looked at Faith and let her say it herself. "Jonah," Faith whispered. The ranger repeated it clear so the square would have to remember a human word, not a price. Consequences fell in pieces, not all at once. Prentice rode out with his men quiet and straight, because quiet and straight sometimes keeps contracts alive longer than gunsmoke. The marshal went with the ranger toward Cheyenne, because the book in her bag had lines that matched his hands. Bren followed 2 steps behind, with his hat in his fingers and his mouth full of dust. Laish walked alone behind all of them like a man who had misplaced his throat. The bell slowed. The crowd did not cheer. The crowd learned how to stand with shoulders that did not want to be ashamed. The midwife wiped her arms and set the blanket tighter around Faith, and put the baby where the heart beat strongest. Asher put his Colt away, and then held both hands out and empty, so Faith could see they were hands and not tools. On the steps where the ledger had sat, Asher took the money he had left, $13.06 in nickels, and put it on the table for the midwife and for the church crib box. He turned to Faith and did not step closer. He said, "I am a man with a past I owe for, and I will ride to stand in front of that bill when the ranger calls me. I bought your freedom with coin and a horse and the last of my name, not to own you, to give a thing back to the square they tried to take. Here is another thing I do not own." He took a small brass circle on a leather thong from inside his shirt, a plain ring that had been his mother's in a county where the law was kinder only by an inch. He held it like a man holds a live coal. "I'm asking plain," he said. "I would stay and mend fence and carry water and be counted where you count. I will ask soft and take your answer hard if it is no." Faith looked at the ring and then at Asher, and then at the midwife and then at Jonah. And then at the square she saw how the day sat in people's faces like a fact. She said, "Not today, not with the baby, not 2 hours old and the law still tying its own rope." She said, "You will sleep in the loft and you will come down when the kettle asks and you will mend what breaks if your hands know how. You will not spend coin to impress me. You will spend quiet, and if winter ends and the roof does not leak where you said you fixed it, and the colts sound and the boy laughs when you enter a room, then ask again." She put the ring back in his palm and closed his fingers, and her hand was steady. The square breathed like it had passed a test. The days that followed did not give gifts. Fence wire ran out and had to be twisted short to meet itself. Wind walked the lane with grit in its pockets and threw it into eyes. Asher learned the baby's sounds, and when to stand on the porch and count storm seconds, and when to split wood thin. Faith learned how it felt to sleep, while someone else listened to the night. The midwife left a key on the sill, the key to the chest that now sat in the church under a new lock with the ranger's mark. She said symbols matter. When the world forgets names, Asher ran his thumb along the key's teeth and put it back where it could be found. Letters came from Cheyenne with dirt on their creases. Bren would face a hearing. Leish had confessed too much and not enough. Marshal Snipe had offered to put names in a book in exchange for time. Prentice was gone from the territory for a spell, and the railroad had sent a cleaner man who smiled less. The bell rope was tied again, but the knot was different. Folk came by to leave flour and to ask how a baby makes a fist that small. Faith put Jonah in sunlight at the window when the day allowed and watched his face learn shapes. Asher fixed the porch step that had nearly killed the midwife twice. He said sorry to the wood when it split wrong. He said nothing to Faith when the work went right. She noticed and put more beans in his bowl. In spring, the creek came up and made a sound like a new word. The square went back to weighing nails and rope and how much sugar a man could buy without looking foolish. The feed store printed a sign that said, "Donations recorded at counter," and under it the clerk wrote numbers where people could see them. A habit started of saying out loud the names on envelopes when the church plate went by. The bell rang for deaths and weddings, and once at noon because the rope slipped and the midwife laughed until she had to sit down. People said the day a woman was auctioned after childbirth and a man bought the sale and broke it with a nail was the day the town's back stiffened one notch. The price of choice is never small. It comes due in winter feed and in rags boiled twice and in miles walked to ask a judge to read a letter with his mouth. Asher learned that staying costs more in some ways than running, but the math is better. Faith learned that mercy is not softness. It is a hinge that lets a door swing the right way. The boy learned the bell was only a bell and not a threat. He learned the weight of a cup and how the square smells when noon gets serious. The midwife learned to sleep through honest hammering. The ranger learned the town could read without being told, and the seal went into a drawer and did not come out except to prove a point. If this sits right in your chest, carry it to the next square where a paper lifts and a crowd forgets its own eyes. When someone names a price for a person, speak the stake plain and count it where everyone can hear. Draw on wood, not on flesh, and let the nail carry the shame it needs to carry. If a ring passes from a man's hand to a woman's palm and comes back with a "not yet," learn to stay anyway, and to work anyway, and to wait with your mouth shut and your hands open. And when the bell rings, ask what for, and if the answer is wrong, reach for the rope together and pull it until the sound tells the truth. Click on the video to watch story that moves you much more than that. Subscribe to the Wild Frontier Tales and tap the bell so you never miss our heartbeat tale.